County. But today, the man of the hour is Stephen Brueggerhoff from Brazoria County, and he will be talking about fabulous figs for the Gulf. So, Stephen, it is all yours, and take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. Howdy, folks. I'm glad y'all could join us this morning. It's a beautiful morning here on the Gulf Coast. Down here in Angleton, it's threatening to rain, but we're looking forward to that. That's part of the pleasure of living on the Gulf Coast is these seasonal rains that help to break up the heat a little bit. I'll be talking about fabulous figs today. Your moderator, Paul Winsky, he is horticulturist with Harris County. We have a few other folks, a few other colleagues that will be assisting as well, answering some of your questions. Again, if you have any questions, please use the chat function of this program, the software on your desktop. Ask any questions of our guys. They'll help to answer them as quickly as they can. We will break in a portion of this presentation for, I'll ask Paul if there are any outstanding questions, probably about 6-7 slides into this presentation. There will be a video. I will attempt to show you a video that I created and edited. It may look a little glitchy, but we're going to go ahead and scope it out. We're still working out streaming software on our end. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us this Wednesday morning, July the 22nd. I'm Stephen Brueggerhoff, County Extension Agent in Horticulture for Brazoria County, part of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension family. Now, I want to give a shout out for one of the programs that we do have. Of course, Extension, AgriLife Extension does offer research-based education that helps consumers understand how their food choices impact their health. And we do that through larger initiatives. We have an initiative called Path to the Plate. This program has been around for the past several years. We've been working our programming into the Path to the Plate initiative, programs like Dinner Tonight, our horticulture programs that we provide. It's all about improving our lives through nutrition, as well as best practices in horticulture. A little bit about the agenda today, what we'll be reviewing. I'll talk a little bit about figs, how we define figs. I will bring to your attention some activities or some modifications that we need to think of when we're working in our homes. I do understand that the majority of the folks that are viewing this presentation are homeowners. And certainly, I want to provide you a little bit of a glimpse into commercial production. So some things that you can think about regarding site, soil, water testing, site improvements that we can make at home. You may not be creating an entire orchard, but certainly you can implement some of these practices that we use to create an orchard. I'll talk about the 6 steps of orchard culture. Think of your single tree or maybe a few trees that you have. We'll talk, of course, the star of the program, Fabulous Figs. We'll be talking about varieties appropriate for the Gulf Coast, as well as a few you might consider, if you have limited space, for container gardening. And then we'll leave you with some resources that you can review. This presentation will be available as a video a little bit later on. We work hard behind the scenes to get all of these programs together to you. So let's get into the program. Figs defined. Figs are an ancient fruit. They're thought to have originated in Western Asia. Of course, figs have been around for thousands of years. But for this continent, of course, they were brought first to California from Spain, that culture that was coming to Spain in the 1700s. As the Spanish influence was growing, figs were brought right along with them. I love old botanical illustrations like the one that I'm showing you. It's from Johann Jacob Haid. It's an engraving from the early 1700s. So it kind of brings that history into play. Of course, we say that the ancient Romans, of course, the Asian cultures were utilizing this wonderful fruit. It's just an outstanding fruit that we've treasured and cherished over many, many millennia. As our culture goes, you may not know this, but Brazoria County and Galveston County was the hub of commercial production of figs in the early 1900s. There were several canneries around. San Leon was one area that figs were produced. There was a cannery there. There was a cannery here in Angleton. My office is in the county seat in Brazoria County, the city of Angleton, beautiful small city. That's where the administration, the county administration happens here. But there was also a cannery here along Highway 288. It's long since gone, of course. Angleton was known, was put on the map by this one product called the Fignolia, which was a chocolate-covered fig that was praised for its sweetness as a candy. Of course, with the advent of, as population started growing, the urban areas like Houston started growing, figs were sent nationwide from our counties, but due to hurricanes that occurred in our area, which helped to wipe out some of these commercial enterprises, as well as orchard, and then the Great Depression helped to lead to the demise of some of this as the hub of fig culture. So it's good to recognize where we came from, know what came before us. I do have a few books that I have that I don't remember if I put them in the resources section of this presentation, but the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, was invested heavily into fig culture. And I have several books that were publications from 1901. I have an image that I wanted to show you in just a moment from that. So again, it's always good to celebrate our history and understand what came before us. Nowadays, figs are really considered to be dooryard plantings. They're more common here in Texas. So again, currently and contemporarily, figs are exported from the United States, but 98% of the commercial production is in California. I love this picture. It was taken from one of the books that I was talking about from 1901. This is an image from the USDA publication, and it's called Mission Fig Tree in California. So figs, I know you probably grew up with a fig. You remember a fig in your backyard, either from your grandparents or your parents. You possibly celebrate figs in your home right now. We know that figs can be huge shrub-like trees. Oftentimes we grow them, we let them get out of hand. They're multi-trunk specimens that can reach up to 20 feet tall. You can see by this gentleman in 1901 in California, this mission fig. It's much larger than the gentleman himself. He's probably an average height. I'm 6'4", but this gentleman's probably maybe 5'7", 5'6". So you can see how big these trees can get. They do have a shallow fibrous root system. I did look up to see what that meant. I often see that a reference in some of the research that I'm looking at, but I don't see any descriptor. I finally found a descriptor for how deep those roots can get. So imagine a fibrous root system, not one single root going out or a system of roots, but more fibrous that's spread out at least a good 30 to 50 feet, depending on how big the tree itself is into the landscape, spreading out that far, maybe going down into the ground, depending on what your soil type is, 10, 15 feet. So they're fairly shallow rooting plants. And that can make a big difference in how your success in raising these fruits. So keep that in mind. These plants are sensitive to drought stress. Remember, and with your experience, if you have some figs at home, figs must be ripened on the tree, and they're quite perishable. So, referencing back to this, 120 years ago, collection of figs is still the same as it was back then, because figs don't have a long shelf life, right? You may get about a week before they start to dry, shrivel up, and start drying on your countertop or in your refrigerator. So they have a very, very short shelf life. We can subdue that somewhat when they're shipped. Of course, they're shipped in containers that are kept at a lower temperature, a refrigerator, about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So that helps to keep them viable while they're being shipped to their location. But figs themselves, they don't ripen once you take them off the tree. You've got to let them almost ripen to the point of sweetness to be able to successfully keep them. If you pull a green fig off of the tree, unless it's a green colored variety of fruit, it's not going to ripen on your countertop. So these precious little treasures are quite perishable. I want you to keep that in mind as you're thinking about getting into fig culture or maybe celebrating it at this point in time. Figs themselves they do much better in a more alkaline soil type. Soil pH range anywhere from 6 to 7.5. Now, those are the extremes. So we want to see figs in a soil type that hovers somewhere around 6.5, maybe on the scale, balanced on the scale at 7.0. That means that these plants may work better. They're a little bit more salt tolerant. They will work a lot better as far as a fruiting tree on our Gulf Coast. So one of the advantages to this particular plant is they are not as susceptible to salt in the soil. Now, I want to introduce you to Brazoria County. I think that everyone should treasure where they are. Get to know the area that you live in. It'll help you to discover what you can grow in your area. If you're viewing this program, say from the Hill Country, or maybe down in Nueces County, our good colleagues down there, Kevin Gibbs, horticulturist down in Nueces County, they probably have a much different soil type than we do here, but there's areas, part of their natural area, that describes or informs us who we are. We should take pride in the places that we're at. This is just a snapshot of Brazoria County, and I'm sure real estate agents were trying to sell folks that were into orchard production as very, very productive soils. For those of us who are from this county, we know we do have some challenges in the soil, but we're trying to get from a natural area, more towards this. We're trying to modify the land to accommodate these fruiting trees that we have, to try to bring up a fruit that's just wonderful and delicious for us to eat. So you remember me saying that you need to get a sense of place, right? Get to know where you are, and part of that is getting to know what your environment is like. Here in Brazoria County, of course, high humidity most of the year. We have quite a bit of rainfall or potential for rainfall. On a good year, 52 inches, around 52 inches a year, sometimes more, sometimes less. But we do keep that in mind when I'm looking at different types of fruiting trees to work with. You remember me telling you that fig trees are shallow-rooted plants. So I need to make sure that I'm putting a plant in place that can handle the soil type. Here in Brazoria County, primarily they're alluvial loams and clays. That means that the soils are highly productive. But the challenge that we have are a high clay content. We typically would call it St. Charles clay. It's been identified as a St. Charles clay, and that's predominant throughout the county. Our pH can range anywhere from 5.8 to 8.4 on the pH scale. And I suspect that as you get closer to the coast, it's going to be the pH is going to be raised somewhat. We're fortunate in our area to be designated on the USDA plant zone map as 9A and 9B. What that means is we can identify on average how cold it can get, what kind of freezes we can anticipate. So the beauty of knowing where I'm at, basing it on some of those known factors, we know what soil type we have, we know what pH range I'm working with. That informs me that I can work successfully with a plant like figs. Pretty cool. Peaches? Peaches are a little challenging. You can work with them. You can work with fruiting trees like peaches here, but you need to take into consideration another factor here, what we call chill hours. So chill hours are cumulative lower temperatures below about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Our county is rated on average about 400 chill hours. I do host a web page on our Brazoria County AgriLife Extension website for horticulture, and I do have a section devoted to urban orchards. So if you have a chance, go to brazoria.agrilife.org/horticulture, and there'll be an icon that talks about urban orchards, and I have some information up there related to chill hours. How many chill hours we gotten over the past 4 or 5 years is hovered anywhere between 250 to 300. It's rare when we get up to 400. But just helping you to be aware to take that into consideration when you're thinking about what kind of fruiting tree you want to put in your landscape, and what we're working with. So some considerations that I'm going to beg you to go ahead and think about when you're trying to establish an orchard, trying to establish trees, fruiting trees or fruiting vines in your area. It all starts with the soil. So I gathered that basic or that gross information from different resources, but I want to drill down a little bit closer. Each person's lawn, each person's landscape. Let's say you're in a natural area outside of the city, in a more rural area, and you have pasture that you're working in, or if you're working from your house and you're working with a highly impacted soil. If you have just purchased a house and the house was just recently developed, or if it's been on the ground for say 30 to 40 years, that soil has been manipulated and has been impacted by our footprint. So we need to know specifically what's happening on our site. And one way to do that is by committing to a soil test. Yes, folks, you need to put some skin in the game for this. I do advise that you get a soil test when you're working with establishing fruiting trees. In our county, of course, we have a high clay content. I live in the city, and I know that mostly in urban areas, our soils are somewhat compacted from our activity just by walking across it, maybe, from recent construction or construction that you're going to commit to. You're compacting that soil. So it's good to get a soil test. You can increase your productivity by identifying, creating a baseline, understanding what soil nutrients are available. Nutrients are available in the soil. Getting to know your pH. We know that figs do best, a little bit balanced, maybe a little bit alkaline in our soils. If you're in a soil type that is more acidic, you may have to modify that environment. It's going to be more challenging for you if you do, right? If you're in a soil type that, and I'm just going to pull numbers off the top of my head, soil type that's 5.5, which is fairly acidic, it's going to be very challenging for you to try to bring that, to raise the pH of that soil. So you may consider a different plant or consider a different planting environment for that. So it's always good to know that information. And of course, salinity, soil salinity. We need to know what our soil salinity is so that we can understand how that affects the growth of the plant. It will affect the growth of the plant. Remember what I told you, that fig trees are a little bit more tolerant of saline environment, saline soil. So we should be fine, but it's always good to get a soil test. Where do you get that? I've got a website right there, and I have that on this slide, and I have that repeated in the resources section at the end of this presentation. So again, I can't emphasize enough that a soil test is important just to create a framework or a grounding to understand where you're working from, what you have to work with. It provides more efficient maintenance in the future and reduces the challenges that you might face in raising some of these trees. You also might consider a water test. Now, when we're trying to establish a commercial orchard, a smaller orchard for commercial production, or if we're working just with a single tree in our backyard, maybe 2 trees, because I'm a figaholic, and I don't know about you, but I've got 3 different fig trees that I have, 2 of which I'll show you in a moment. Well, if I get a chance, I'll show them to you. Anyway, it's always good to get a water test. You need to know that you have suitable irrigation, suitable water available to your plants, either in quantity as well as quality. We need quality water that's going to those trees. Figs are more tolerant of water quality. I've heard of people growing figs with brackish water. I would not recommend that, but it's always a good idea to get an idea of the quality of the water that you're working with. Now this slide and this information is more applicable to commercial orchard development, but certainly it is something that you should consider when you're, regardless of the kind of fruit tree that you're putting in your yard. It's always good to get a water test. Now we often talk about mulch, right? That is something that's an activity or a product that we talk about, but I don't know about you, but I've had that moment in my personal life where I'm thinking, wow, I'd like to get some mulch for this area. How do you figure out how much mulch to get? Do you need a large truckload? Do you actually know how much 1 cubic yard will cover? So you need some tools to estimate how much mulch you will need. Figs are shallow rooting plants, and they are susceptible to freezes. So we need to ensure that we provide them some protection by giving them some mulch. I'm not talking about compost. I'm talking about mulch, or something that we're not incorporating, that we're putting on the top of the soil to protect those tender trees. This is a simple calculation. Takes you back all the way to high school math, maybe college math as well. Take your square footage, length times width. Then you take that square footage and you multiply that by depth, and you wind up with cubic yards. It can save you pennies in the future. If you don't have a truck to get 1/4 of a cubic yard, but you go to your favorite feed store or another store and purchase bag soils, that information will be on those bag soils. It'll help you to be more efficient in how much of that product you actually purchase. So a little bit of quick calculation. We do have broke down some what we call depth factors that you can use in that multiplication. Simple tool for you to help you estimate how much mulch you'll actually need for that landscape environment. Paul, I'm going to let you know I'll break in just a moment, but I'm going to go through a percolation test with our folks, and then I'll ask if there's any burning questions that I can answer for our viewers. So if you're establishing an orchard or planting a tree, whether it's an ornamental tree, more important, I think, for a fruit tree, our precious trees, we need to provide a percolation test. Here in Brazoria County, we have soils that are easily saturated during a rain event because of the kind of clay that we have that's predominant in our county. A percolation test is a method to measure drainage at your site of planting, and it's quite simple. No fancy tools are needed for this. Get a shovel, get a hose, and get a measuring stick. I'll tell you about that in a moment. So how do you do this? You dig a hole 1 foot wide by 3 foot deep with straight sides. Stephen says 3 foot deep. Why do you dig 3 foot deep down? Well, it's very important in our county because I happen to know that we have a lot of clay, and I want to make sure that where I put that tree, it's going to be successful. So I'm going to dig down at least a good 3 feet. If you're working with trees like pecans, it's more important that you get a much deeper, certainly a much deeper hole to check on the percolation of that water. But since we're talking about figs, remember they're more shallow rooted, 3 foot should suffice. Think of the length of that shovel. The length of the shovel is probably going to be about 10 to 12 inches or 1 foot. Dig down 3 shovels worth and you've got 3 feet. Simple. Step 2, fill the hole with water. Let it sit overnight to get a more accurate reading, and then refill the hole with water the next day. And this is the important part. Measure how that water is draining, right? If you can, if you have a child to assist with this, put a task to them. Go out there and check on the water. You can get a yardstick. So you've got a hole that's full of water. Get a reference stick. In this case, it was an old piece of bamboo. It could be the handle of your shovel, anything that you can lay across the soil surface, because you're going to use that as your reference for measurement. Then take a yardstick or tape measure in this case, and just sink it down and see how much that water drains every hour. You can enjoy that with your children. You can do that yourself. Bottom line is we want approximately 2 inches per hour. If that hole has not drained adequately within 24 hours, you might consider either another planting environment or a raised bed, depending on how you want to do this. So just a few tips for you to consider whether you've established trees or going to put trees into your yard. Paul, I'm going to ask you really quickly, are there any questions that I can answer for folks?
Stephen, I've got two quick ones for you. First, there is somebody, unknown user. You've got your video on. Please turn it off. We would appreciate that. So, Stephen, the first question is, for commercial production, what is the recommended distance between the figs?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. For it's going to be 20 feet, right? 20 feet from center. So put them about 15 to 20 feet from center. In commercial production, you want to be able to get your maintenance equipment around those trees. You want to be able to get up underneath that tree as well. I will discuss spacing in a moment. As a matter of fact, my video is going to focus on that. But that's a really good question. So I'd say 15 to 20 feet at minimum or maximum. That'll get you around those trees adequately. Between rows, you're going to want to provide at least enough space for a tractor to get through. Again, we're talking commercial production, a vehicle to get through those swales. And that's about 24 feet between rows. So yeah, there you go, about 15 to 20 feet.
Okay, and the other quick one I've got for you is the yield reduced dramatically as if figs are pruned for ease of harvest?
Yes, will affect production depending on when you prune those plants. And I'll discuss that in a little bit, but those are really good questions. So again, to answer your question, viewer, yes, you will affect production depending on when you prune that plant and that tree and what time of year and what variety it is. And I'll talk about at least two that I know of in a little bit. So thank you for asking those questions.
Okay, you can proceed, Stephen.
Thank you, Paul. All right. We're doing great on time, folks. I've got about an hour that I'll be presenting to you. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm Stephen Brueggerhoff, horticulturist with Brazoria County AgriLife Extension Service and part of the Southeast Region Initiative. This presentation brought to you by the Southeast Region of Horticulturists here along the coast. This series brought to you weekly, gardening on the Gulf Coast. So 6 steps to success urban horticulture. We'll discuss those 6 steps that'll involve planting and maintenance. We want you to practice proper sanitation, whether you're developing an orchard or working with a single tree. It's always best to practice proper sanitation. Pruning and training, just a little bit. We'll touch on that briefly. We want you to control weeds, pests, and pathogens. That goes without saying. I'll probably breeze through that slide very quickly. We want you to think about protecting those fruits and some ideas for you to consider. And then we'll talk about the stars of the show, some of the cultivars you might consider for our areas that would be appropriate here along the coast. So planting and maintenance.
Pardon me, I neglected to hear.
Hi, if you could please mute your microphone and use the chat function. We'll be happy to answer any question that you have.
They're not letting me chat.
Paul, if you could help to help that person out.
Thank you.
So, as far as planting and maintenance, for commercial production, of course, the wider the better. We want to accommodate that equipment. For us here at home, 16-foot spacing might be enough, 15 to 16 foot. All recommendations for these trees, because they're sensitive to frost, where we as professionals recommend to plant trees maybe a little high. For these fig trees, you want to plant them just slightly deeper, preferably in my county in raised beds, because we do have a challenge with saturated soils, and we don't want these plants sitting in water. Certainly, I'm going to put them in a raised bed or on a row. The best time to transplant them, if you're growing them from a cutting or have them in a 1-gallon pot or maybe 3-gallon pot, is to transplant them right before the spring growth. So if you're going to put them out, fall might be a good time to do that. Remember to provide some protection for that plant. Fertilization we'll talk about in just a moment, but for that new planting, don't fertilize that plant. We're trying to get it to establish its roots. So just let it go, put it in the ground, let it go for about a year, and then fertilize it the following season. As far as watering goes, these plants can, if we do have drought stress, it really depends on the time of year. Remember me saying that here in our county, we get about 52 inches of rain on average, some years more, some years yes. So my suggestion to you, dear viewer, is just to pay attention to your local rain events. Here, of course, we've been blessed with rain, but I know that within the next couple of weeks, even though we are almost into hurricane season or we're into hurricane season, we still may undergo a drought-like conditions and it may get dry. So I'm going to make sure that I at least provide these plants with at least 1 to 2 inches per week during those drought-like conditions. So again, just pay attention to what is occurring in your area at that particular season. For fig trees, I suggest that it's more important to get drip irrigation on them. There is one particular disease that there's really not a good control measure for it for homeowners. It's called fig rust. If you haven't had fig rust, you will have fig rust at some point, and that will affect production. So because we're in the Gulf Coast, we have a more high humid environment. We certainly increase the chances for attracting fig rust to our fig trees. The best thing to do is to not overhead sprinkler, not put an impact sprinkler on those trees, rather than to deliver water at the soil level just to get water directly to that plant. More efficient that way. Remember that these are a temperate species and they are susceptible to frost. So we want to protect immature trees as they're planted as well as they're growing, just as a best practice. I've got a video I'm going to show you really quick. Now I do have a caveat. Some of the sound on this may be distorted and the video may break up when you see me. So you'll get to see me where you're not seeing me right now. You'll get to see me in this video. So here we go.
Stephen, you have to turn on that, click that box for sound.
Looking at some of the fruiting trees that we have, a lot of the fruit trees are in full production right now. Some of the varieties that we have include different varieties of orange, some lemons, Eureka, Improved Meyer lemon, one lonely pomegranate, still trying to figure out what variety that is. But I'm also featuring fig trees. Over the past couple of months, I've been including individual species that I wanted to feature here in Brazoria County at our garden center. One of the old standbys in the garden is this variety called Celeste. It's in full production right now. Some of the fruits are just now starting to ripen. Let me show you. If there is one variety that is a standout, tried and true in southern gardens and is one that I would consider to be an heirloom fig, it would be Celeste. Celeste produces a moderately sized fruit, not very big, maybe about 1 inch in diameter. They're just now starting to ripen and come on. We're going to be canning soon, picking them off the tree and sharing some of our delicious fruit with some of our neighbors. I just wanted to show you how prolific this particular shrub is, this particular tree is.
We've let it go fairly large. It's about, I'd say about 10 feet tall now, and it's almost just as wide. Later on this fall, we're going to be cutting it back just to give it some structure and stature to a size that we can actually keep up with, and also provide more space for other trees that we're putting out here in the orchard. Spacing is certainly one major consideration when putting new plants into the orchard. Fig trees require quite a bit of space to grow. I'm going to back out here a little bit just to show you how much space we've given in between existing plants. Right now I've got it sandwiched in between a pear tree and a jujube tree. I've determined that it's at least a good 15 feet away from center of each one of these trees. We're going to be keeping this fig tree pruned a little bit lower to shape so that we can keep up with it. Production, it really doesn't need a lot of space. So we'll keep it pruned to about 10 feet at the most in diameter.
All right, folks, thank you for that, for your patience on that. I hope that y'all were able to, that I was able to engage the audio after that first technical difficulty. So you can see that figs, we need to provide some space in between them, and hopefully that video provided a visual for you of how far you need to have those trees apart. So it's best always to get in there and measure that, not to estimate it, so that you'll know that you can get around those trees. Now, one variety that we were looking at in the video is called Alma. Alma has more of an upright growth to it. But anyway, I'll get into pruning in just a moment. As far as fertilization, our AgriLife horticulture team does recommend frequent nitrogen application throughout the year. I have seen another fertilization recommendation from Purdue Extension offering to put down ammonium sulfate, about a half cup first during the late winter, and then to increase by a half cup annually until the trees are about 4 years old. So when you do distribute fertilizer, of course, you want to spread that evenly, make sure it does not connect with the trunk of that particular tree. Keep it at least a good foot distance from that tree. We want to try to distribute it in the root zone, in the active root zone that tree is growing. One way to know if you're applying too much nitrogen during the year, if you get excessive growth from over-fertilization, it will delay ripening and can or has the potential to reduce fruit quality. If your mature trees, right, more than a year, if your trees are producing more than 1 to 2 feet of new growth per year, you might want to reduce the nitrogen application that you have. So we can work with some of this basic information, and it's really up to you, viewer, to pay attention to how that plant is growing, seeing if it's continuing to produce fruit or not, and how that's working. Another step that we talked about is orchard sanitation. This goes without saying. Just remember to remove or destroy any disease or infected parts that you see on that tree. It's all right to prune dead or diseased twigs and branches from the trees that we're maintaining throughout the year. There are appropriate times to prune a tree for maintenance. For maintenance purposes, though, if it's a dead branch, it's a dead branch. Go ahead and prune that out. Unless you're drying figs on the tree, which is done commercially, but unless you're doing it intentionally, remove the rotten fruit or the dried fruit, or what we call mummies, off of those plants. We're inviting other pathogens, other insects towards that tree that may affect the growth of that tree itself. And just keep your orchard floor clean. Make sure you pull up any dropped material from that tree. Simple steps. As far as pruning and training our fig trees, remember that fig fruit develops on current year growth. There are some varieties that offer what is called a breba crop, B-R-E-B-A. That means it's spring fruiting. So breba crops are producing off of last year's new growth. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of production in the spring. Now, I remember that there was a question earlier about pruning. Will pruning affect production? And it will. For varieties that do have a breba crop, like Celeste or Alma, you don't want to prune those at the same time that you would prune the rest of the trees that you have in the ones that produce a full crop annually. It will affect their crop size. So you might want to wait until that breba crop is produced to start a little bit of maintenance pruning. Texas everbearing, also called brown turkey, they are the same, and it produces a fair crop following a heavy winter pruning. Now, as far as pruning shape, you can do it. You got one of two ways to do this. You can either let it take its natural form, like multi-trunking that particular tree, or you can prune it up into a single trunk or an open base shape. I often to consider to prune them to keep the skirt lifted, if you will, to keep the branches from touching the ground. You'll have less issues. You'll have less issues with maintenance, as well as other pathogens or insects getting onto that tree if you keep the limbs pruned up a little bit on your trees. This just goes without saying. Control any weeds that you have, pests or pathogens. It is, once the plant is established after that first year, it is all right to use products that contain active ingredient glyphosate. You're wanting to keep that orchard floor clear, to keep the area around those trees free of any weeds that might compete for nutrients as well as water. Always remember to mulch around these trees. We're trying to reduce instances of pathogens like fig rust, a fungal pathogen. You can control that somewhat with copper-based fungicides, depending on what state you're in. There are some states that limit the use of certain types of fungicides on fruit-producing trees like fig trees. So just pay attention to that. If you do see any leaves that are affected by fig rust, you might consider ditching some of those leaves, removing them from the tree itself, if practical. Fig mosaic virus. There's another pathogen, a viral pathogen called fig mosaic virus. There is no control for that. The best method to prevent that from happening is to work with clean plant stock. Make sure you know where you're getting your trees from, that they're clean from the onset, and that you just keep the area sanitized. And you remember me talking about mummies on the trees, or even those varieties that we have that might have a more open eye. There are insects or beetles that can enter into that fruit as it's swelling or producing, that can introduce either fungus or bacteria into that fruit and will affect them. So these are more problem with open eye figs, and I'll talk about what the eye of a fig is in a moment. Fruit protection. I don't know about you, but I have a battle right now with the squirrels around my townhouse. I do appreciate squirrels, and I also curse squirrels. And I do have a tree that I've started in a 1-gallon pot that they literally decided that the buds on my cutting are more delectable to them. So they started eating away at it. Now, fortunately, my little tree, my little cutting has rebounded, but it really upset me. But it's more important to protect those fruits. Oftentimes when we think of fruit protection, we think of trees like apples or peaches. So I would ask you, if you do have the time and the resources, to try to think outside the box and provide protection directly to that fruit. Fruit protection, like these little bags, there's this bag type product produced from Clemson University called the Clemson bag. It's just a thin paper bag that's been developed. It has a twist tie attached to it, and you simply just wrap it around the fruit. The fruit will be able to develop. It will not, it doesn't cut down that much on sunlight, so that as a matter of fact, it might provide a little bit of protection for that fruit to keep it from getting sunburned. But once we provide protection to those fruits, we're helping to deter insect introduction, fungal pathogen, especially my nemesis, squirrels, as well as birds. Think outside of the box. Maybe use organza gift bags. You might consider that. I think those are a type of fabric that is more synthetic, but certainly they're porous, have a very, very fine mesh. You might consider using those if you have a little bit of resource to do that. And then you can always use fine or large mesh screens. Apply that to the tree as the fruit begins to develop, before it ripens to the point of attracting those birds. So don't just cover your tree all year round. You can certainly apply that seasonally as the fruit develops. And this is an image of the Clemson fruit bag. So, stars of the show, we're going to wind up this program. Thanks again for joining me this morning. Stephen Brueggerhoff, horticulturist with Brazoria County AgriLife Extension. Figs are good for us. So there is nutritional information that I wanted to share with you. They are a great source of dietary fiber. I did see some information that's saying that a half cup of dried figs is equivalent to a half cup of milk in calcium content. Maybe you're lactose intolerant or you want to increase your calcium uptake. When they're seasonally available, eat some figs. Figs are also sodium, fat, and cholesterol free. And they're naturally sweet, no sugar needed. Now, there are recipes that you can find for making cakes. Of course, it always talks about adding additional sugar. But certainly, these figs, once they ripen, they are as sweet as can be. Now, a little bit about the form of a fig. What are we actually eating? We are eating a part of a plant called the syconium. The syconium is technically, it's an enlarged, fleshy, hollow receptacle with flower parts or multiple ovaries inside what we consider to be the fruit. So again, that fleshy part surrounding the strawberry colored center, that is part of the stem tissue or the peduncle of the plant. The inside, all of those little squiggles inside the fleshy part that we see inside are actually it's a gelatinous-like interior that's comprised of hundreds of unfertilized flower structures. The eye of this fruit, technically it's called the ostiole. We're trying to work with varieties that are known to have a semi-closed eye or a closed eye. There are some enthusiasts or some of you viewers may be wanting to explore a little bit more and get some varieties that have an open eye. There are 4 forms of figs. I'm not going to get more technical than that, but we work primarily with closed-eyed figs here in the Gulf Coast, in Texas in the South. Part of the reason for that is this fruit to develop does not need a pollinizer. It does not need a small little wasp to pollinate those fruits to produce seeds. So we're kind of selfish in that way. We want these fruits to produce for us. Some, of course, that will work for us here along the coast. One is called Alma. I've got this out at the demonstration orchard that we have. It's a green fig. When we say medium size, you can get them, maybe about 3 inches in diameter. They're a late season fruiting plant. They produce a rich, sweet pulp. They have kind of a more blonde interior. I'm just fascinated with the coloration of these figs. Keep in mind that Alma is a little bit frost sensitive. So if you do put Alma in your orchard or in your landscape, you might want to provide it some protection from some of these freezes that we have. Then there's Celeste. Celeste is a standard tree that we typically work with, produces light purple, kind of small sized fruits that often will mature here on our coast about mid-June, maybe a little bit later. They're a rich and sweet fig. They're just wonderful, but they have a very tightly closed eye. And they are very cold tolerant, cold hardy. They will produce a tree that will get fairly large. The video that I was showing earlier, I was standing in front of a Celeste tree when the video first started, and that tree was at least a good 15 feet wide by 10 feet tall. So I have to do a little bit of heavy pruning on that tree to get it back into shape. Italian Black will work really well for you here. We consider it to be a mid-season plant. It ripens about mid-July. They're great for preserves, and they do offer that closed eye. Italian Black does have the potential to produce a Breba crop earlier in the season, so keep your eye on that. Oftentimes, the gold is going to be in the crop that you harvest in summer. LSU Purple, the picture that I'm showing you right now is the interior of LSU Purple. It was developed by Louisiana State University in the 90s, I believe, in the mid-90s. It has a white-yellow inside, a firm fruit, kind of teardrop shaped, a sweet color with a closed eye. This is a picture that I took of one that I collected a few weeks ago. This is the exterior. I just love the translucency of that color of that fruit. That's not a light shining through it, folks. That's a ripe fruit. Great ingredient colors of purple and red. It's just an outstanding color, and the contrast of the interior is just outstanding as well. It's right on time as far as production. Brown turkey, another standby, often referred to as Texas everbearing. Don't get those two confused. They're the same plant. It's a late season tree that produces possibly twice a year. I have had our brown turkey produce a smaller crop, a Breba crop, earlier in the year, but I'm really looking forward to the production that we're getting out of it right now. And it has a closed eye as well. Some others that you may consider, so those are standards that I was just talking about. Some you might consider. One variety called Blue Giant. It has a lot of promise for production here on the coast, especially in a higher humid environment. Produces a large fruit with a purple skin and pink flesh, and it has a closed eye as well, and it is judged to be cold tolerant. So it may work well for you folks down a little bit closer to Corpus Christi. We're going to try that out as soon as I can get a variety of this here, Blue Giant. We'll try it out in our demonstration garden. Another one you might consider is Bernabat, large pink skin, juicy flesh. I couldn't find a picture of a fruit for you, so this is the best I could do, folks, but it's determined to have a lot of potential for our area as well. And then another yellow-skinned variety called Lemon, has a creamy flesh, very unique flavor with citrus notes to it. So these are some that I'm asking you to consider to include in your collection at your house. A few varieties that are appropriate for containers that have a moderate growth or smaller growth. Green Ischia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has a larger fruit to it, ripens green, yellow, a rich flavor, estimated to grow about 10 by 10. So you can grow a plant that's about 10 foot by 10 foot in a container. You have to give it a large container, but certainly you can bump that up as it continues to grow for you. One called Little Miss Figgy. I'm really looking forward to getting one of those to see how well it works. I'm letting y'all know that I live in a townhouse, so my space is constricted at my house on the porch. So I'm going to try varieties like Little Miss Figgy, but one that I do have is called Little Ruby. I've got that on my porch, and I'll keep y'all updated. If you keep up with me, folks, in Brazoria County, I'll keep y'all updated on the success of my Little Ruby that I have on the porch. It's estimated to grow about 4 by 4 at the max, so it's a true dwarf variety. Try that one out. Maybe one with a medium black fruit called Petite Negri. Dark purple fruit with amber flesh and a strawberry to purple pulp. That one can get quite large. And then the last one that I'll leave you with for containers are Violette de Bordeaux. Medium purple fruit, dark purple, red flesh. Look some of these up. Again, this video will be available to you to view at a later time. If you're furiously trying to take notes, you can go back and view this at your leisure. We'll provide a link to that video later on. More importantly, you're going to want to know some of these resources that you can look forward to. Aggie Horticulture Fruit and Nut Resource page from our Texas A&M AgriLife Extension team for horticulture. We have many fact sheets on different fruiting plants, including figs. Fig propagation. This is a link to a blog from horticulturist and manager of a research station out in Fredericksburg, Jim Camus. It was just a quick note on propagating figs. So you want to propagate them when they're dormant. And if y'all ask me that, I might be able to answer that a little bit more detail. The ET network, when we're considering water for our plants, we need to take into account evapotranspiration rates, which means how much water is actually shedding off the environment and potentially from that tree. So this is a resource that you should invest in to understand what evapotranspiration means to those plants that we're trying to raise. The Extension Soil, Water, and Forage Testing Laboratory, that's the place that you would get water testing as well as soil testing for your landscape. Texas Plant Disease Handbook, a link specific to some of the diseases that we will see on figs. There's not too many, but there are some that you should be aware of. It'll help you be more successful in your gardening. Louisiana Ag Center, Louisiana State University, the Ag Center, they are known for hybridizing a number of figs that are available on the market now. Visit them for the information that they have to provide, as well as Purdue University Extension, and of course, University of Florida, IFAS Extension. Folks, I thank you very much for joining me today for this program. If you want to get in touch with me, certainly you can. sbrueggerhoff@tamu.edu. I'm here in the office, except for when I'm not. But Paul, if there's any additional questions that I can answer for folks, we'll take a few more moments and we'll wind up this program.
Okay, Stephen, I have three that I jotted down. I want to thank Skip and Boone for helping me stay on top of the questions. We've been answering a lot that way. But one question was, what type of mulch do you recommend when you mulch your trees?
Well, gosh.
Whatever you can get a hold of, right?
Whatever you can get a hold of. So there is a gold standard in amongst arborists. It's called the arborist wood chips, and those are freshly shredded, freshly shredded trees. You know, right out of the bat. Maybe they'll sit around. So if you put them through a chipper shredder, you let them sit for about a day or two. That is the gold standard, believe it or not. It does not draw nutrients away from the tree itself. It is considered to be a really good resource. Other than that, getting colored mulch, unless that's your aesthetic, I just say go simply with a coarser coarser material, coarser nuggets rather than something that's shredded. The challenge with shredded bark, using that as a mulch, it can compact itself and starts shedding water and not allow water to penetrate as easily. So you can have challenges with finely shredded mulch. I suggest to go with a more coarser nugget if you can. Next question.
Okay, next one is, are the Clemson bags that you talked about, are they waterproof?
I believe they are. They do have somewhat of a waxy film on them. I've not used one myself. So I can't answer that question from experience, but I'm thinking that they probably do have some water resistance to them because they are made for an outdoor environment. We will get those rains. So I want to say that, yes, they do have a little bit of water resistance to them.
Yes, I've used bags similar to that for pollination, and usually they are breathable so the fruit can continue to develop, but yeah, they will keep moisture out. The other question I jotted down was, have you had to ever deal with scale infestation, and how do you deal with it?
I have had scale on a tree that I was assisting with. So there was an overgrown brown turkey at one orchard, and it just had scale covering the tree. The best thing to do for scale is to try to apply some of the products that we do recommend from our end when you're controlling scale on either ornamental or fruiting trees. Horticultural oils, there are certain grades that are more refined, that are more appropriate to use in hotter environments. The challenge with horticultural oils is they can affect tissue, both the leaves as well as the stem tissue of certain trees, depending on the grade. So applying horticultural oils at an appropriate time of year, as well as getting the tools to be able to spot those scale and when they're more active in producing offspring. It's a little bit more complicated and not an easy answer that I can provide at this sitting. So vigilance is the key. I do use horticultural oils to try to keep them in check. If I notice that there's not as much of an infestation, I'll try to wipe them off as best I can with a combination of horticultural oils that are applied at the appropriate time. If you are working in a hotter environment, look for a more refined oil that you can use, and then always pay attention to the active reproduction of that particular insect. Kind of get to know the insect and know when it's at a crawler stage. Once they form that scale or that carapace, right? No matter what the scale is, whether it's a softer brown scale or it's an oyster shell scale, that does provide some protection for that insect. So you have to wait almost until they're at a crawler stage to make that more effective. Applying a systemic for these kind of fruiting trees, I do not recommend.
Okay, great. And one last one. What do you consider the dormancy season for figs here in the Gulf Coast area?
Dormancy season is typically our winter time. The figs in our orchard some of them do hold on to their leaves depending on how severe the winter is. But as the weather cools down, it does initiate a kind of dormancy for the fig trees that we have. So anytime between here in Brazoria County, anytime between early December, a little bit into March, where they'll start thinking about producing, start elongating some of those buds and actively growing. So it's fairly typical of other fruiting trees that we're working with as well. The key thing to remember is the variety that you're working with. How susceptible is it to any kind of frost events that you do have, if you have to provide additional protection for that plant. Celeste and I think Alma are a little bit more frost tolerant, but some of the other varieties I have may not be. So our typical winter, anytime between December and mid-March, these plants will really start responding and growing actively about early April.
All right, Stephen. Well, thank you for that. It was a great presentation. You will be receiving a survey from Stephen, and so we would definitely appreciate your feedback. This has been recorded, so it will be on our YouTube channel here in a few days. And I do want to remind you, next week at 10 o'clock here on Wednesday, we will be talking about earth-kind pest, disease, and weed control, which will be presented by Skip Richter, who is our horticulture agent in Brazos County. So we thank you for your time. We thank you for your feedback, and enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great day.